Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 431 to 440. No matter how eager Lynn was to immediately set Russell to work 24/7 after his analysis of the space-time coordinates, he could do nothing before they were fully deciphered. So, he focused on preparing for the upcoming sea voyage with great enthusiasm. First, Lynn worked with Klein to secure false identities through the Evernight Church. He also made a deal with Bernadette, purchasing the primary and auxiliary materials for the Sequence 5 Seer potion at a favorable price. On a clear night, he completed his advancement to Sequence 5. As for the ceremony required for the promotion, Lynn, being a high-ranking Beander on the Hermit pathway and on the cusp of becoming the Knowledge Emperor of the Second Epoch, naturally had alternative methods to replace the standard ritual. After the promotion to Sequence 5, Lynn realized that the Constellation's Master Potion was almost completely digested. Is it because I possess knowledge of the cosmos? Or because I have traveled through the stars? Or perhaps it's due to my understanding of many secrets related to the constellations. Lynn pondered for a while, eventually attributing it to the advantages of his Smurf accounts. The digestion of lower-ranked potions came too easily to a high-ranker like him. It seemed that some unconscious actions in his other account fulfilled the conditions for the constellation's master potion digestion, making his advancement feel like cheating. He wasn't too concerned. After asking Bernadette to keep an eye on mysticologist characteristics and those who followed the hidden sage, he happily took 008 and used his traveling abilities to visit the 5 seas. He locked onto Vice Admiral Iceberg's location, confirmed Danitz was still aboard the Golden Dream, and had 008 resume scriptwriting. Once everything was done, Lynn began packing his things for the long journey ahead. Thus, on the second morning after Lynn's promotion to Constellation's Master, the newly promoted adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, along with his companion Gabriel, boarded a passenger ship bound for the Pearl of the 5 Seas, the City of Generosity, Byam. We should meet the Admiral of Stars emissary when we reach the City of Generosity, then board the Future and head toward the Mermaid's territory. And not a single unexpected thing is going to happen, Lynn said, sitting on a small stool, holding a sea chart gifted by Bernadette. He sketched on it as he spoke. At this point, Lynn had altered his appearance. His golden hair was now the color of white gold, and his once pale gray eyes had turned into a translucent blue. His facial features had undergone minor adjustments, not drastic enough to be noticed individually, but combined, he now looked entirely different. Even standing side by side with his former self, no one would suspect they were the same person. The only similarity was that both appearances were incredibly handsome, as if crafted by the creator. Indeed, because it is. This was the new face of Lynn's identity, Gabriel. He picked the name purely because of the game Ultrakill. He loved that game back in his old world, nearly giving his caretakers a heart attack when they saw what he was playing. Good times, good times. It's not like I'm gonna act like Ultrakill's Gabriel, maybe. Meanwhile, Klein used the same alias from the original story, Gehrman Sparrow. That sounds like tempting Murphy, Klein remarked with a chuckle. Though he had assumed the Gehrman Sparrow persona, he hadn't yet fully embraced the role of a cold-hearted bounty hunter. He still behaved rather casually. Well, I was saying that so something does happen. It'll only make things more exciting. Otherwise, it'd be too boring, Lynn said with a mischievous grin. Klein shook his head helplessly. Looking at Lynn, a thought crossed his mind, and he suddenly said, Lynn, have you noticed that lately, you've been acting more and more like the version of you from Azek's memories? Lynn blinked at him, completely unfazed, and casually stroked his chin. Really? Maybe I've just been unleashing my true nature. He tilted his head slightly, glancing at Klein before adding, why? Does it bother you? Not really, Klein shook his head and looked at the young man before him. To be honest, you have changed a bit compared to before, but it's not a bad thing. It's like the difference between an adult husky and a puppy husky, Klein said, his expression becoming somewhat odd. It's like a dog that used to wreck your house growing up and is now even better at causing chaos. This was Klein's heartfelt sentiment. He could feel that Lynn had indeed undergone a subtle change, but it wasn't the same as what he had experienced in the gray fog. The fused version of Lynn back in Saphira Castle had given Klein a sense of unfamiliarity. However, the Lynn before him now made Klein realize that the person was still the same, though before, he had held back a little. Ever since that unexpected event in Saphira Castle, Lynn seemed to have let go of all restraint, radiating a carefree and adventurous spirit. In the past, Lynn would never have dared to mess with a weakened Sequence Zero like Russell. But now, nothing seemed to scare him. Klein felt a tinge of worry, not that Lynn's personality would be replaced, but rather that if he continued being so reckless, he might provoke a powerful figure and be destroyed in the blink of an eye. Theoretically, that shouldn't happen, but one could never be too sure. Hey, I admit I might be letting loose a bit, but I'm not an idiot without a sense of caution. I wouldn't provoke a big shot so carelessly. Lynn shot Klein a disgruntled look, clearly understanding what was going through his mind. If I ever run into someone I can't handle, I'll make a quick escape. And besides, Lynn's tone shifted as he looked at Klein. What right do you have to talk? You're way better than me at provoking Murphy. Hearing this, Klein instinctively felt guilty and quickly explained, those were all accidents. I didn't do those on purpose. Lynn let out a couple of dry laughs, saying nothing but conveying everything. Klein was left speechless. Fortunately, Lynn's mind was as flighty as ever. Before Klein could come up with a defense, he had already switched topics and excitedly said, "Oh, right. Gehrman, you don't have a messenger yet, do you? Let's summon one." Since they were heading to the 5 Seas, how could they not summon Miss Reinette? A messenger. Klein blinked, thinking first of Azek's bone messengers and then of Lynn's elusive one, which he had never seen before. He was intrigued. Klein did need a messenger. In this era without telephones, having a messenger would make communicating with friends much easier. Especially now that they were heading to the 5 Seas, it was even more necessary to have a way to stay in touch with his family and friends in Tingen and Backland. End of chapter. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Seeing Klein's interest, Lynn continued to encourage him. I happen to have the spiritual materials needed for the ritual. Why don't we give it a try now? Even if we fail, it won't be a big deal. Klein finally nodded and said, I do need a messenger. However, he quickly added, but even if we decide to summon one, we should wait until we dock and find a secluded place. Otherwise, we might endanger others. Although this was different from the original version, Klein had now received thorough lessons from Mr. Dorr, and his knowledge about messengers had deepened significantly. Even so, randomly summoning a messenger was still quite risky, and Klein couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be any danger to himself or those around him. So naturally, he didn't choose to summon one immediately. Ah, right. I forgot that summoning a messenger carries risks. Lynn scratched his head and smiled sheepishly. Lynn didn't actually forget the risks of summoning a messenger. He simply knew that Klein had a 99% chance of summoning a safe one, and even if there was danger, he was confident he could handle it. That's why he didn't bring it up. But since Klein had said so, Lynn didn't explain further. The two patiently waited until the ship docked at the first stop along their route. After a brief rest at the port, they disembarked and found a secluded area with no one around for miles. They quickly set up the ritual and began summoning a messenger. I summon in my name. The spirit that wanders about the spirit world. The friendly creatures that can be subordinated. Those who are swift beyond imagination. Because both Lynn and Bernadette had previously summoned fast messengers, Klein's first instinct was to summon a speedster as well. He did succeed, but a bit too well. With a sudden whoosh, the sound of wind rushed by, and a blurry figure dashed past Klein. Then, nothing. Klein Klein and Lynn exchanged glances. Although Lynn was laughing inwardly, he blinked and smiled calmly, saying, "Your messenger sure is fast, even faster than mine. Maybe we should wait for a bit. It should come back soon, right?" Klein thought it made sense, so the two waited together. After a full 30 seconds, there was still no sign of the messenger. Could it be that the messenger is too good for the job? Lynn mused, rubbing his chin. Maybe you should summon another one. I feel like we're not going to see this one again. Klein nodded grimly. After becoming aware of the connection between the gray fog and the spirit world and sensing faintly the power of the gray fog within himself thanks to Mr. Door, Klein had a good guess as to why the messenger summoning had gone like this. It was likely that the spirit world had sensed the power of the gray fog and, in response, sent the best candidate available, but the result was a bit over the top. Klein had no choice but to end the summoning and try again with a new incantation. This time, he summoned a weak, easily overlooked presence, aiming for something low-key, safety through invisibility, so to speak. Then, nothing happened. Maybe it's already here, and we just can't see it. Lynn rubbed his chin, glancing at a corner of the area. As someone whose intuition was sharper than that of even angels, Lynn could actually sense where the messenger was. He could even tell how pitifully it was cowering, but that didn't stop him from feigning ignorance. After all, the fool's messenger position had already been claimed by a remnant of an angel, so the others might as well head back to wherever they came from. Klein, however, was feeling a bit frustrated. He ended the summoning again and changed the incantation once more. This time, out of caution, he summoned a creature with survival abilities. After all, as the saying goes, as long as they're not dead, they can deliver the message. Speed and stealth didn't matter so much. Just staying alive was enough. To avoid a repeat of the previous two powerful summon, Klein even avoided using words like strong this time. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, the number of spirit world beings eager to be messengers is countless. In fact, they were practically fighting over the position, with angels even blocking the gates. So, even though Klein's description wasn't too extreme, he still ended up summoning a being with extremely strong survival capabilities, one that resembled a turtle. And this turtle messenger took 10 minutes to crawl a single centimeter. Klein. Although speed isn't necessary for delivering messages in the spirit world, it shouldn't be this slow. Left with no choice, Klein politely dismissed the turtle messenger, and Lynn finally couldn't hold back his laughter anymore. Ha ha ha, so, this is the trouble with being too popular. Having finally witnessed a scene from the original version, Lynn wiped the tears from his eyes and encouraged Klein once more. Why don't you try summoning a unique being willing to become your messenger next time? Most people would probably fail with that description, but with your popularity, you might get a whole lineup of messengers to choose from. Klein was initially a bit annoyed by the teasing, but after hearing Lynn's suggestion, he paused and realized it made sense. Since he was so popular in the spirit world, holding a recruitment drive didn't seem like such a bad idea. If this attempt didn't work, I could always ask Mr. Door for a few travel talismans and personally head to the spirit world to find a messenger, Klein thought to himself. Without further hesitation, he proceeded with the fourth summoning. I summon in my name. The spirit that wanders about the spirit world. The friendly creature that can be subordinated. Unique beings who wish to become my messenger. If it were anyone else using such a broad description, not a single spirit world being would respond. But due to the unique aura of the fool, Klein immediately received a response as soon as he finished the summoning. However, instead of a massive group of spirit world beings as Klein had imagined, there was only one. It was a female humanoid figure dressed in a black gown with intricate patterns. The reason she wasn't entirely human was because, instead of a head, she held 4 golden-haired heads by the ponytails, 2 in each hand. This gave her an air of danger and eeriness. She doesn't seem like a regular spirit world creature. Is she a high-sequence entity? Klein wondered to himself, but before he could say anything, Lynn let out a surprised sound beside him, as if he recognized the summoned messenger. Huh. Aren't you Miss Sharon's teacher? What was your name again? It's too long, I forgot. End of chapter. Reincarnation, Sharon's teacher and the former leader of the Temperance faction within the Rose School of Thought, is an ancient bane from the chained pathway at Sequence 2. Currently, she is in a weakened state. In the original story, Reincarnation responded to Klein's call while he was under the disguise of Gehrman Sparrow, soaring across the 5 seas. She then became Klein's messenger, earning the affectionate nickname of Miss Messenger. However, she is more commonly known by readers as the Coconut Tree Lady and the Executor Pokemon. There wasn't any particular reason for the nickname. It mainly stemmed from the fact that Reincarnation has no head on her neck and carries 4 heads in each hand, making her look quite like a coconut tree. Moreover, Reinette is one of the angel investors under Mr. Fool, humorously referred to by readers as one of the 5 disabled angels in the Fool's ranks. Lynn hadn't truly forgotten her name, of course, but it didn't stop him from pretending. After all, it's the Angel of Secrets who is familiar with Reinette, not Lynn Sotos. Today, Lynn is still in full acting mode. Reinette was stunned for a moment when she heard this. She then turned to look at Lynn. After a few seconds of silence, as if recalling something, the 4 heads she held in her hands spoke one after another. You are Lynn Sotos. She then turned her gaze to Klein. Though her expression didn't change, her eyes showed a hint of realization. You are Sherlock Moriarty. It was clear that before answering the call, Reinette didn't know who had summoned her. Or perhaps she only sensed that the one who called her had a connection to the Lord of the Spirit World, which is why she decided to invest. She hadn't expected that the person was involved with her student in Backland. This wasn't surprising. Although Lynn had arranged a cooperation with Reinette under the guise of the Angel of Secrets to deal with the Rose School of Thought, the two had never met in person. She had only heard about Sherlock and Lynn in her students' letters, knowing that these two seemed closely related to the Angel of Secrets, but she couldn't sense anything special about Sherlock from a distance. After all, the chained pathway isn't the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Reinette, being closely tied to the spirit world, could sense Klein's uniqueness during the summoning. Perhaps she could even vaguely detect a thread of fate, but it wasn't as precise as someone like Will, a professional in the field, who could pinpoint a target right from the start. However, she wasn't foolish. After Lynn spoke, she quickly deduced who the 2 men in front of her were. She also finally understood why the mysterious Angel of Secrets had treated these 2 individuals differently. She couldn't discern anything special about Lynn Sotos for now, but the other man was clearly connected to the Lord of the Spirit World. It seemed the angel had invested in him much earlier than she had. So, you are Miss Sharon's teacher, Lady Reincarnation. Klein quickly pieced things together. He first looked at Reinette in surprise, then his expression became somewhat complicated as he remembered something. Wait, wasn't I summoning a messenger? Why did Miss Sharon's teacher come for the job instead? A question mark almost visibly popped up over Klein's head, but then he thought of the Snake of Mercury, Will, who had similarly invested in him, and suddenly, everything made sense. Could it be that she also intended to invest in him? No need for formalities, just call me Miss Reinette. The heads in Reinette's hands spoke once more, their tone polite. All right, Miss Reinette. Klein quickly corrected himself, glancing at the angel in front of him with a hesitant expression. Though he had a suspicion that she was here to invest in him, he couldn't be sure. Considering that he might be wrong, Klein decided to tread carefully. Clearing his throat, he asked, Miss Reinette, are you here to apply for the messenger position as well? All right, Klein admitted that he was a bit nervous. After all, he wasn't familiar with this angel. Her appearance was quite eerie, unlike Will, who came across as an innocent child, making it impossible to feel nervous around him. I can become your messenger, Reinette Tinacare said without any hesitation, nodding all four of her heads in unison. She then added, I am very fast, and quite resilient too. It was obvious that Reinette Tinacare was highlighting her abilities based on Klein's previous demands for a messenger. She just didn't mention having a weak presence, probably because, well, there was no way someone like her could have a low presence. Miss Reinette, how do you know my requirements? Have you been here from the start? Just how long have you been watching? Klein's mind raced with questions, but he didn't voice them. Still, he had an inkling that she genuinely wanted to become his messenger, whether she was there to invest in him or not. So, Klein hesitated for a few seconds before continuing, would you be willing to sign a contract and become my messenger? As he said this, Klein still felt it was hard to believe. He could understand why others might want to invest in him, having now grasped just how powerful the Lord of the Spirit world was. But an angel willingly becoming my messenger. Was that even possible? Klein couldn't wrap his head around it, but he was deeply shaken. I will require 1 gold coin each time. Reinette Tinacare's four heads nodded again in agreement, stating her terms. Huh. Do angels even need gold coins? Or is this just a hobby of hers? Klein was stunned for a moment, but then he recalled the various angels he had encountered or heard of. The scriptwriting, mischievous angel of secrets, the innocent and art-loving fate angel, the war angel who was always sarcastic while downing strong liquor, the fanatical warlord, and Will, who, despite being thousands of years old, could still act like a child while enjoying ice cream. Klein. Wait, is there even a single normal one among these powerhouses? Asterisk. TN. No. There is not. End of chapter. Klein had never compared the angels he knew before, but now, as he placed them all together in his mind, he suddenly had a vision of them being a group of demons, monsters, and ghouls. Is this the characteristic of high-sequence beyonders? Klein didn't quite understand, but he chose to respect it. However, considering his meager wallet, he thought for a moment and asked, can the recipient of the letter pay the gold coins? Yes. Reinette agreed without hesitation. In the end, the two of them signed the contract. Lynn, standing beside them, watched with great interest, also curious as to why Reinette charged a gold coin as payment. Could it be that she was saving up money for her student? But that didn't make sense. After all, how many times can one send letters? This wouldn't make much money. Or did Miss Reinette vaguely sense Klein's sleeping fate or the importance of the 5 special gold coins and thus made this decision? Lynn pondered silently, pinching his chin. Meanwhile, the two had finished signing the contract. However, Reinette didn't leave immediately. She glanced at Klein and suddenly said, if you encounter danger, you can ask me for help, once, for 20,000 gold coins. Investment doesn't mean outright gifts. After all, sometimes too much kindness can turn into enmity. Before knowing someone's personality, making seemingly equal but actually goodwill-laden transactions is the proper way to invest. 20,000. You could sell me, and I wouldn't fetch that much. However, she is a sequence too. Even in a weakened state, she's a significant safety net. Klein's mind raced with thoughts as he looked at the Miss Messenger and sincerely said, thank you, Miss Reinette. If I encounter danger, I'll definitely seek your help. Reinette seemed satisfied with this response. Then she added, if you are dealing with a demigod from the Rose School of Thought, you can do so for free. Ah, right, the Angel of Secrets previously discussed cooperation with Miss Reinette to deal with the Rose School of Thought. Klein froze for a moment before recalling this detail from the corners of his memory. At this moment, Lynn spoke up, if you plan to join the Angel of Secrets in dealing with the Rose School of Thought, you might have to wait a bit. He's been quite busy lately. Reinette glanced at Lynn, and all 4 of her heads nodded, indicating she understood. She then said, if I'm free, and in the 5 Cs, you can inform me. Lynn and Klein exchanged glances before Lynn nodded and said, all right, Miss Reinette. If the Angel of Secrets plans to take action, I'll inform you. The scene quieted down after that. A few seconds later, Reinette asked, "Can I leave now?" "Of course, Miss Reinette." Klein, who had initially thought that the messenger might have something else to say, promptly dismissed her. Once she disappeared, he finally breathed a sigh of relief, only to hear the cheerful voice of his companion beside him, "Congratulations, congratulations. From today onwards, you're officially a man with an angel as a messenger. Do you feel any special emotions about this?" "Nervous, maybe." Klein shot Lynn a look of mock annoyance and scratched his head. In truth, he wasn't particularly nervous, he felt more of an odd sense of wonder. From today, he had his very own messenger, an angel level 1 at that. Who would ever believe such a thing? Either way, it's a good thing, right? Lynn patted the fool's shoulder. This shows that the big shots are optimistic about your potential. So, work hard to ascend to sequence 0. That's not something hard work can solve, Klein retorted with a bit of a smile. His mood had calmed somewhat. As they say, once you owe a lot of debt, it doesn't feel burdensome anymore. Having already interacted with the Angel of Secrets, the Evernight Goddess, and chatted comfortably with Will, Klein was getting used to such things. Investment is just an investment. As Lynn said, it's not necessarily a bad thing. After summoning the messenger, Lynn and Klein wandered around the island for a while, embracing the idea of, since we're here anyway. After a brief tour, they returned to the ship to await its departure. Lynn noticed that there were many unfamiliar faces on the ship's deck now, and a few familiar ones were missing. Clearly, some people had disembarked at this stop, and others had boarded. Among the newcomers, one person leaning against the railing, laughing and joking with those around him, caught Lynn's attention. The man was cloaked in black, appearing to be around 30, wearing an obviously fake wig and painted on dark black eyebrows. As a disguise expert, Lynn could tell that the man's original eyebrows were likely charred yellows. He had bright, deep blue eyes, a face that wasn't particularly handsome but not unattractive either, just average. Lynn blinked and, in almost an instant, recognized who the man was. This made him chuckle softly before nudging Klein, who was gazing out at the sea. "What is it?" Klein turned back in confusion, following Lynn's gaze. After a few seconds of thought, he hesitantly asked, "Isn't that Blazing Danitz, with a 3,000-pound bounty?" As someone who had come to the Five Seas with the intention of selecting exceptional marionettes from lucky pirates, Klein had thoroughly done his homework beforehand. He familiarized himself with nearly all pirates of note and bounty, studied their photos, and investigated their deeds, confirming their rewards. This naturally included Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards and her crew members from the Golden Dream. And Blazing Danitz was the fourth mate of the Golden Dream. As for how Klein saw through the disguise, there was a disguise. Of course, having done his research, Blazing Danitz wasn't on Klein's hunting list. There were two reasons for this. First, as a Sequence 7 Beyander on the Hunter pathway, the pyromaniac was too weak and not particularly special for Klein. He had already learned from Mr. Dorr that the number of marionette slots was limited for a marionettist. Even when fully digesting the potion, there were only 3 slots, so Klein didn't want to waste them. Second, Danitz and the other members of the Golden Dream weren't exactly pirates but more like adventurers. Though they had committed a few acts of robbery over the years, they hadn't done anything truly heinous. They spent more time exploring or hunting treasure. Thus, Klein had no real interest in hunting Danitz. End of chapter. In reality, Klein had a few ideal targets for his marionette, including Admiral Hell Ludwell, Admiral of Ailment Tracy, and Admiral of Blood Senor. Of these, the one that tempted Klein the most was naturally Admiral of Blood Senor, who had ties to the Rose School of Thought. As a member of the Indulgence faction within the Rose School of Thought, Senor's crimes were enough to get him executed 100 times over. Moreover, the powers of a wraith were extremely suitable for pairing with a marionettist. Even Mr. Dorr mentioned that, without a higher sequence marionette, a wraith was currently the best choice for Klein. This was largely because Klein already had the creeping hunger, which served as a shepherd substitute. Another shepherd would seem redundant. If Klein couldn't hunt down Admiral of Blood Seigneur, the other two targets would suffice. Both were powerful Beyonders, and their abilities were well suited to Klein's needs. While these three were the best options, Klein knew that, despite his current sequence and all his magical equipment, a one-on-one fight with any of them would likely end in his favor. Creeping Hunger and the Devil Revolver gave Klein confidence. Both of these items were top-notch for their respective sequences. Creeping Hunger needed no introduction. The Devil Revolver, while crafted from a Sequence 6 Devil's characteristics, was made by a Beyonder of much higher sequence. As a result, its abilities rivaled any Sequence 5 artifact. This was also why Klein hadn't considered buying a new weapon yet. Until his promotion to a higher sequence, the Devil Revolver was enough. But even with a good chance of winning one-on-one, there was a fatal problem. Each of the pirate admirals had a crew behind them. None of them were alone. Therefore, aside from these three best targets, Klein had other options, including some Beyonders under these pirate generals, excluding Danitz. It seemed, though, that Lynn was quite interested in one of them. Klein glanced curiously at Danitz, who had just finished chatting with others and was now gazing at the sea. Then he heard Lynn lower his voice and say, "I've seen him in his memories. He's going to be a future divine oracle of the Fool, your colleague." Naturally, Lynn was referring to Klein's public identity as a follower of the Fool. In the later parts of the original story, Danitz, under the title of the Fool's Divine Oracle, would lead the Sea God cult's rebellion and help settle the citizens of Silver City and Moon City. Calling him a follower of the Fool was completely accurate. The Fool's future divine oracle. Klein was taken aback for a moment and couldn't help but glance at Danitz again. It was clear that he wasn't an extremely evil person. In fact, judging from how he treated strangers, Danitz might even have a good character. The only issue was, he didn't seem very smart. No, I shouldn't casually judge others' intelligence. That's not right. Klein suppressed the slightly offensive thought in his mind, but Lynn continued in a low voice, "From what I saw in his memory, this fellow seems like a decent person. He has his flaws but nothing major. He might have a bit of a masochistic tendency, though, he seems to like strong, dominant people who can step all over him. Right now, he's got a crush on his captain. Also, yeah, he's not very smart, probably too dim-witted for even the conspirator potion to fix." Klein. Wow, that's like stripping him of all dignity. Although Klein was aware that the Angel of Secrets could establish connections with his various selves across different times, it wasn't until today that he truly grasped how straightforward this connection could be. Perhaps you only just met Lynn, but to him, he might know every little detail about you, including the type of toothbrush you use. No wonder Lynn was able to draw the cat illustration all those years ago. Back then, it seemed like a prophecy, but now it felt more like a prophecy from a future version of himself. Klein thought to himself, suddenly freezing in realization. Because he had finally become aware that the cat in the illustration Lynn had drawn looked exactly like his current appearance. Though the future that the cat illustration hinted at involved him and Azek. Without Lynn's intervention, I might have died once, and after reviving, I would no longer be able to use Klein's identity. I would probably lose contact with Azek temporarily and wouldn't be able to ascend as a marionettist through the church's channels. So, in the original timeline, I likely met up with Azek again when I decided to go to the 5 seas to look for mermaids, or perhaps earlier, but in this alias instead. After deducing the general flow of the original timeline, Klein saw Lynn gesturing toward him before walking straight toward blazing Danitz. Klein felt a little helpless but didn't stop him. After all, who could restrain an excited husky? "Hello there, sir. Are you also planning to vacation in the City of Generosity?" Lynn cheerfully greeted, with a radiant and sunny smile, looking like an innocent newcomer, easy to deceive and full of money. Hello, I am indeed planning to enjoy a few days in the city of generosity. Are you and your friend heading there as well? Danitz had already noticed Lynn and Gehrman, mostly because Lynn hadn't bothered to hide his gaze. Even though Danitz wasn't the brightest, he was still a hunter with keen instincts, missing that would have been difficult. As for why Danitz was here, it really was a vacation. The crew of the Golden Dream did have annual leave. Danitz had originally planned to take his break early next year, combining it with the New Year holiday. However, due to some unforeseen events, he decided to take his vacation early, which led him to this passenger ship. Of course, it's my and Gehrman's first time in the 5 Seas, so we have to check out the legendary city of generosity and enjoy ourselves. Lynn nodded. He genuinely planned to explore the city of generosity before Gardener came to pick them up. If they could deal with the sea god Calvetua early, that would be even better. But you guys don't seem like you're just here for tourism. Are you planning to become adventurers here? Danitz gestured toward their outfits, which were more fitting for adventurers than typical tourists, and directly asked. There was no need to hide it. Every year, many young people came to the 5 Seas hoping to make a living as adventurers. Some succeeded in supporting their families, some ended up as shark food, and others eventually turned to piracy. End of chapter. We actually came mainly for the mermaid. We heard tales of mermaids, so we wanted to search for one. If we could do a bounty mission and hunt some of those evil pirates along the way, that would be even better, Lynn said very openly. Every word was the truth, but when pieced together, it made him sound naive, like a rookie adventurer chasing fantastical creatures with no real understanding of the 5 Seas. Since Lynn had walked over, Klein had also followed. For some reason, Klein suddenly thought back to when he first met Lynn. At that time, Lynn also gave off the same rookie vibe, but after getting to know him, Klein realized that Lynn was anything but a rookie. You want to find a mermaid. As a member of the Golden Dream, the blazing Danitz was obviously aware of the mermaid myths. He glanced at the two beside him, shook his head, and said, "Ha, I advise you to abandon that idea. Even if you find a mermaid, you too wouldn't be enough to satisfy it. It's not some harmless fairy tale creature. But I heard that a mermaid's singing is beautiful." Lynn showed a troubled expression. Since we're already here, it'd be a shame to return without hearing a mermaid's song. That too was the truth. They had come specifically for the mermaid's song. A mermaid's song isn't something ordinary people can listen to. If you really want to hear someone sing, you might as well go to the opera. Danitz looked at Lynn with a speechless expression, as if thinking, which idiot is this? After a moment of contemplation, he added, I know a few good theaters in Byam, I can recommend them to you. Of course, I'm talking about proper theaters, Danitz added, as if recalling something. Lynn looked at him, blinked, and suddenly said, I thought you were devoted to your captain. So you go out on dates too? Who said I go on dates? I just chat with them. Danitz's face turned bright red as he denied it without hesitation. The next second, he realized something, staring in disbelief at the two people in front of him. Wait, how do you know I have a crush on the captain? Do you know who I am? His tone had turned wary. Aren't you blazing Danitz? Lynn looked puzzled, as if he couldn't understand why Danitz was reacting so strongly. His straightforwardness left Danitz at a loss. After hesitating for a moment, Danitz mumbled, could it be that my disguise has been seen through again? Upon hearing that, Klein instinctively glanced at Lynn, only to see his mischievous companion pat Danitz on the shoulder. Actually, your disguise isn't that bad. I just happen to be good at makeup, so I could see through it. Oh, that explains it. I knew my disguise was good, Danitz sighed in relief. Klein. At this point, the fool himself didn't know whether to marvel at Lynn's confidence or lament that a small ship could harbor two such absurd individuals. If their disguises could be called disguises, then anyone even remotely skilled in makeup would be considered a master of disguise. Wait, no, this isn't just about the disguise. Even if you could tell who I am, how did you know I have a crush on the captain? Danitz finally caught on again and tried to step back out of Lynn and Klein's reach. To his surprise, he found that he couldn't move. Not only that, but all of his Beyonder abilities had vanished, as if they had never existed. Is your crush on your captain a secret? Doesn't everyone aboard the Golden Dream have a crush on Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards? Do you not know that? Lynn's hand remained on Danitz's shoulder, and he looked at him with a confused and somewhat pitying expression. You don't know you have an entire ship full of rivals in love. Though, to be fair, none of you have a chance. As for why Danitz couldn't move, that's laughable. Let a Sequence 5, who is actually a Sequence 2, with numerous abilities of the Hermit pathway, get close to you for over half a minute, and it's not just that Danitz can't move or use his Beyonder powers. If Lynn wanted to, he could turn Danitz into a small animal and carry him in his pocket. No way. That explains it. I trusted them, and they. Damn it. Danitz's eyes widened in disbelief as the truth sank in. The fragile ship of friendship had capsized in an instant, proving no match for the turbulent waves of betrayal. No, wait. This isn't the time for that. Who are you? What do you want with me, or rather, with the captain? Danitz suddenly snapped out of it. Though his body couldn't move, his expression was wary as he glared at the two in front of him. Let me introduce myself. I'm Gabriel, a Sequence 5 Constellations Master. This is Gehrman Sparrow, my partner and our combat expert. Lynn introduced himself with a smile, his role clear as support. Taking down enemies was Mr. Fool's job. Lynn just added buffs from the sidelines. Also, don't be so dramatic. We're not interested in your captain. At most, we just have a business deal with her. Frankly, we're more interested in you. Danitz felt a chill at those words. He hadn't expected to encounter Beyonder on his vacation. 1. No, 2 Sequence 5 Beyonder, no less. For someone capable of incapacitating him in one move, Danitz had no doubt that Gabriel was indeed a Sequence 5. And since Gehrman was Gabriel's partner, his status as Sequence 5 was just as likely. This left Danitz utterly confused. Sequence 5 Beyonders were not common. Even the pirate generals of the 5 Seas were only Sequence 5, so how had he been so unlucky to run into 2 of them? Sorry, Captain. I think I'm going to die here. Danitz's heart sank. End of chapter. Although Danitz was already feeling hopeless, thinking he was done for, Lynn was reveling in simultaneously messing with the fool and his messenger, and he had no intention of stop messing with them. Lynn eagerly followed the predetermined steps of his preaching, then turned to look at Danitz, who seemed to have turned completely pale. He seriously asked, So, Danitz, will you join the Church of the Fool and become a believer? Can I refuse? Danitz's lips twitched, and after several seconds, he managed to squeeze out a voice from his throat. You want to refuse? Lynn appeared stunned for a moment, then showed a regretful expression, shaking his head. That's such a pity. If you don't want to join the Church of the Fool, we'll have no choice but to deal with you. Danitz. Damn it. I knew this was coming. At this moment, Danitz was torn. Logic told him he absolutely couldn't join this newly emerged Church of the Fool. Worshipping an evil god would lead to a fate worse than death. But it also told him, if he didn't join, he'd die right now, while joining might at least extend his life for a few more days. And there were so many who worshipped evil gods, like members of the Aurora Order, who lived just fine. Maybe. Danitz thought, and then something else occurred to him. He pursed his lips and asked, if I join you, do I need to leave the Golden Dream? Of course not. Our organization is very free. Whether you're part of a pirate crew like the Golden Dream or some secret organization like the Moses Ascetic Order or the Aurora Order, we don't require you to leave. We're all about having members spread across the world. Lynn patted Danitz's shoulder and assured him, and you can rest easy. I've already told you, we have no ill intentions towards Iceberg Lieutenant Edwina Edwards. We only intend to make a deal with her. Hearing this, Danitz relaxed a little, though he couldn't help muttering, "It doesn't sound like a proper organization." Lynn suddenly smiled at him. Danitz's cowardly hunter instincts kicked in at once, and he quickly said, "I will definitely worship the fool. But I absolutely won't let you hurt the captain. Then we're colleagues from now on." Lynn waved and gave Danitz a bright, warm smile. "And you don't need to be so wary. The fool is no evil god. Our church cooperates with the churches of the true gods. If you don't believe me, I can take you to the Storm Church next time. We're all on the same side." Lynn wasn't surprised that Danitz had relented. Based on his original behavior, it was clear that this cowardly hunter wasn't overly opposed to worshipping evil gods. He wasn't a devout believer of any other deity, so naturally, the threat of death swayed him easily. Though in reality, there was no death threat at all. Lynn wasn't a villain. If Danitz had truly refused to join the Church of the Fool, Lynn would have just sighed and waited for him to come asking for help in the future. The real fool, Klein, watched this scene unfold. He wasn't sure what to say or even how to react. He felt like an accomplice in something bizarre. What? Danitz was stunned by Lynn's words, incredulously asking, "You have a partnership with the churches of the true gods?" Danitz wasn't surprised that Gabriel here claimed the fool wasn't an evil god. Every cult tried to promote themselves like that, but to claim they cooperated with the true god churches. That wasn't something you could just make up. Of course. Lynn nodded confidently. "If you don't believe me, once we reach Byam, I can take you to the Storm Church. I need their assistance anyway." Lynn spoke with such confidence, as though he had long established a rapport with the church. While he had never personally met the Lord of Storms in this era, he had a close connection with the Evernight goddess, who was allied with Leodoro. In his view, this alliance made it perfectly logical to say he had ties with Leodoro as well. And Lynn was confident that, if he gave the Storm Lord a heads up, regardless of the Lord's attitude toward him, he'd tolerate it begrudgingly. Seeing Lynn's unwavering confidence, Danitz, who had been skeptical, suddenly became curious. Could this Church of the Fool actually be a legitimate secret organization? Danitz wasn't entirely ignorant of the fact that not all secret organizations were hostile to the true God churches. The Moses Ascetic Order, before its fall, had maintained a good relationship with the Evernight Church. And as a pirate, or adventurer, Danitz had learned much of this from his captain's relentless lessons. But I've never heard the captain mention any hidden existence called the Fool having good relations with the church. Danitz scratched his head, feeling thoroughly confused. "Stop scratching. Scratching won't grow you a brain," Lynn suddenly said from the side. "What brain? I already have one. What do you mean it won't grow?" Danitz clearly didn't get the joke. "Sigh, Danitz, show some common sense." Lynn sighed heavily, sounding genuinely disappointed. Danitz was left utterly bewildered. Klein, who fully understood the joke. Klein cleared his throat, realizing he couldn't let the conversation derail any further. He turned to Lynn and, deciding it was time to discuss business, asked, "You need assistance from the Storm Church?" "Oh, right. I haven't told you yet." Lynn, looking like he had just remembered something, grinned and enthusiastically said, "The sea god Calvetua is about to die. Let's go to its funeral, Gehrman." Klein froze for a moment, then information about the sea god, Calvetua, surfaced in his mind. The sea god was a local faith in the Five Seas, primarily followed by the indigenous inhabitants, many of whom were members of the resistance fighting against colonization by nations like Loan and Intis. End of chapter. It can be said that the original intention of the resistance organization was good. It was to resist invasion, oppose colonization, and protect the interests of the local people. However, since most of the resistance forces were members of the sea god's cult, and their god, Calvetua, appeared to be a mad animal of sequence 3, some of the resistance's methods became excessively violent and bloody, deviating from their original purpose. In Klein's opinion, unless the cult improves its brutal and primitive teachings and style, the resistance organization being closely tied to the cult, would not be able to drive out the colonizers from Loan, Intis, and other countries. The extreme violence and bloodshed of the cult have already caused them to lose much of the local people's support. Many native residents could have been united under the Resistance's organization banner, but they chose not to join due to fear. But why is Calvetua suddenly going to perish? Klein didn't doubt Lynn's words. He knew that, after sharing a portion of his memory, Lynn had also seen many things about the future, and Calvetua's situation was likely part of that. However, I remember Calvetua being Sequence 3. Klein glanced at Lynn and said with some annoyance, "Are you sure we're attending its funeral and not being its meal?" Even a dying Sequence 3 could easily deal with 2 mid-sequences. Klein suddenly realized something and understood, so that's why you want to borrow the power of the Church of the Storms. There was no way the two of them could take down the sea god on their own, even if it were on the brink of death. But with the involvement of the Church of the Storms, the situation would be different. Exactly. I'm giving them an opportunity. Lynn nodded with a mischievous smile. If they don't invest now, they won't even make it to the final round. He spoke as if the Church of the Storms was getting a massive bargain. Lynn was speaking the truth. Investment wasn't something anyone could just partake in. Lynn was surrounded by true gods and angels. If not for the Evernight goddess's sake, Lynn might have already thrown Leodoro to his urges, and caused trouble for him, since he betrayed the ancient sun god and indirectly caused Saucerier's madness. After all, those who betrayed would meet the same fate as the outer gods. Now, giving the Leodoro an investment opportunity might look like Lynn was indebted to them, but it was actually Lynn extending an olive branch, marking the beginning of a friendly collaboration. It's much like two people trying to make friends and testing the waters by helping each other out. This is how relationships are built. Otherwise, the mere Calvetua would be no match for Lynn, even with one hand tied. Once the Church of the Storms officially joined Lynn's group, he might even forgive their past mistakes, though only on his behalf. Whether Saucerier forgives them is another matter. Klein, of course, didn't know Lynn's true intentions. His mouth twitched slightly before he tactfully asked, "When we go to the Church of the Storms, can I stand a bit farther from you?" This was his subtle way of saying, "I don't want to be struck by lightning with you." Lynn looked at him in mock shock, then wrapped his arm around Klein's shoulder, pulling him into a playful embrace. "Don't worry, Klein. As they say, we share blessings, and we share hardships. If I get struck by lightning, I'll make sure we bear it together." Klein's mouth twitched again, and he immediately rejected the offer. "Thanks, but can I request a partner change?" Lynn responded dramatically, "Absolutely not. We are partners chosen by Mr. Fool himself. As the most devout follower of Mr. Fool, are you going to defy his divine message? Klein. Please don't give me such strange settings, thank you." While the two were joking, Danitz, who had been watching the whole time, only felt a bunch of question marks floating above his head. Unable to hold back, he finally asked, "What are you talking about?" "The sea god is going to fall." Although he didn't understand most of the conversation, he did catch that important detail. "Yep, so we're getting ready to attend the funeral." Lynn nodded, then turned to Danitz with a smile. "By the way, Danitz, as the fourth bosun of the Golden Dream, have you had any dealings with the Resistance member in the City of Generosity?" "Ah, I know some of them, but not too well." Danitz hesitantly nodded. "That's enough." Lynn released Klein and patted Danitz on the shoulder. "Danitz, it's time for you to contribute to the Church of the Fool. When we arrive at the City of Generosity, you'll introduce us to the Resistance leaders." Danitz suddenly felt like he had been set up. He looked at Lynn, then at Klein, then thought about the fact that the sea god was going to die. A wave of dizziness overcame him. After a few seconds of hesitation, Danitz asked nervously, "You're not going to fight them, are you?" "Damn it, I'm just a Sequence 7. I don't want to get involved in matters between two Sequence 5s and the sea god. This will be the death of me." "Of course not. We're just going to say hello. And since they'll soon be one of us, fighting would be a waste. Lynn waved dismissively, speaking as if it was obvious. Danitz first breathed a sigh of relief, then suddenly realized something. He widened his eyes and asked, "What do you mean by, one of us?" Lynn smiled as he placed a hand on Danitz's shoulder, speaking slowly. "Why do you think Calvetua is about to die, and why do you think we've come at this exact moment?" Danitz froze for a moment. His intelligence briefly surged as he connected the dots. Carefully, he asked, "Because you're going to attend Calvetua's funeral." Ha ha ha. You're so funny, Danitz. That's why I like you. Lynn burst into laughter, bending over and wiping away tears of amusement. After a long moment, he finally said, "Silly boy, it's because Mr. Fool has set his sights on Calvetua's identity. He plans to assume it." Danitz. Klein. Danitz was utterly dumbfounded. Then, with growing terror, he turned to Lynn and stammered, "Isn't this too important for you to tell me?" "There's nothing wrong with that. After all, you're a member of the Church of the Fool now." Lynn smiled warmly at him. At that moment, Danitz understood the underlying meaning of Lynn's words. As a member of the church, it was natural for him to know such secrets. But if he was no longer part of the church, all of Danitz's faint hopes of escaping vanished. He had not yet formally recited the fool's name, but he knew there was no going back now. End of chapter. Lynn could easily tell what Danitz was thinking, so he simply patted him on the shoulder and said, "By the way, go tidy up a room. After that, move in with us." Since Lynn wasn't short on money, the two of them naturally stayed in a first-class cabin, which had plenty of room for one more person. Thus, Danitz dejectedly went off to pack his things. He didn't even consider running away, because in the vast sea, where could he escape to? He wasn't a Beyander of the storm pathway, so jumping into the sea would only get him drowned. Especially since the other side knew his true identity. If he ran now, he might even implicate the captain. Klein, after Danitz left, lowered his voice and asked, "Isn't that a bit too much?" "I didn't force him. At most, I just scared him a little. You could say Danitz really needs to grow up." Lynn spread his hands, blatantly lying with open eyes. Then he added, "Besides, we have the complete Hunter Pathway potion formulas. We're not going to hurt him. Trust me, he won't regret his choice." For a moment, Klein didn't know what to say. He knew Lynn's seemingly gentle but actually domineering personality. Lynn was indeed a good person, but not one to deeply respect the will of others. Or rather, Lynn only respected the will of his friends. Sometimes, Klein felt that, apart from his friends, others seemed like mere paintings to Lynn. He would protect them, admire them, and even be willing to sacrifice himself to save the world, but the paintings would never truly hold a place in Lynn's heart. Lynn stood on the side of light out of responsibility or something else, not because of traditional kindness. Klein had noticed the same thing in the Angel of Secrets, but this feeling was amplified in the fused version of Lynn. What about the Church of the Sea God? Is Calvetua really going to die? Are you trying to obtain its Beyander characteristics? I wasn't aware Mr. Fool planned to adopt another alias. Klein sighed and shifted the topic, asking a series of questions while sharply looking at Lynn. Caught off guard by the barrage of questions, Lynn looked around sheepishly before answering after several seconds, "But that's a sequence 3. If we can get Calvetua's characteristic, we'll have our very own sequence 3 mystical item. Isn't that good?" Lynn looked at Klein with genuine confusion in his eyes. Faced with such an earnest look from Mr. Fool, Klein could only sigh again. He knew that all of Lynn's actions were probably out of good intentions, so he finally said, "And what about this sea god alias?" "Because Mr. Fool lacks a foundation in the outside world. Although the people of Silver City will come out eventually, it will take a long time. Even when they do, they'll need someone to assist them, so I thought, why not pick up a small church?" Lynn blinked and then suddenly spoke with confidence, "If you don't want it, I'll take it for myself." I'm also short on people, but I figured you needed them more, so I'm giving it to you. Don't fail to appreciate my good intentions. His tone gradually grew more arrogant. And then make me a tool to work for you. Klein gave Lynn a sidelong glance. Ha ha ha, you've got it. Lynn chuckled a few times, then gave Klein a thumbs up, looking as though he'd completely shaken off any sense of guilt. Fine. Mr. Fool shook his head, helpless. We'll see once the Sea God alias is officially in place. After all, who could stop a husky from running wild? Mr. Fool certainly couldn't. As Klein pondered this, he couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. He finally began to understand why Mr. Door's expression was always so strange and complex whenever Lynn was mentioned. Klein had never fully understood what kind of mischievous child Lynn must have been in the fourth epic, but after spending just a few days with this unrestrained version of Lynn, he was beginning to relate to Mr. Door's exasperation. No wonder every version of Lynn needs to have a guardian. Without one, who knows how far he would go. Klein rubbed his temples, glancing at Lynn, who seemed like a happy husky with an imaginary wagging tail. After a moment of contemplation, he solemnly said, Lynn, if you have any plans in the future, make sure to tell me before you act. After a pause, Mr. Fool added, the Angel of Secrets plans as well. No problem, we're partners after all. Information must be shared. Lynn flashed a bright smile and gave Klein an, okay, hand gesture, looking unexpectedly reliable for once. It turned out that even a husky had its reliable moments. At least in the following days of travel, Lynn didn't cause any trouble. Perhaps it was because the timeline hadn't aligned yet, but Lynn and Klein didn't encounter the events of Port of Byam as described in the original plot. In fact, their journey went smoothly, and the passenger ship arrived at the City of Generosity without making any stops at Byam Port. This is the City of Generosity, huh? It feels so different from Backland. Lynn stood on the deck, slowly moving towards the dock with the rest of the passengers while gazing at the famous city from a distance. City of Generosity, Byam, the capital of the Rorstad archipelago, was situated on an island called Blue Mountain Island. The reason this place was called the City of Generosity was mainly due to Blue Mountain Island's vast size, accounting for almost half of the Rorstad archipelago. The island boasted abundant resources like iron, silver, gold, and coal, as well as fertile lands, dense forests, and a rich variety of fruits. It was practically a paradise land. Perhaps, one day in the future, when its mines are depleted, and its lands no longer fertile, people may lose interest in the city. But for now, it remained one of the focal points of the Five Seas. Of course, while Backland is known as the city of all cities, Byam has. As a pirate who had spent years roaming the seas, Danitz instinctively began to explain, though he quickly lowered his voice after only a few words. Of course, I don't mean any disrespect to Backland. It's just that each city has its own strengths. After spending several days together, Danitz had come to understand more about Gabriel and Gehrman. It seemed like this was their first time in the Five Seas, and they probably had spent most of their time in Backland, if not being native Loan citizens. Don't worry, I'm not too familiar with Backland myself. Go on with the introduction. Lynn waved dismissively as he listened to Danitz's soft explanation. Meanwhile, they finally reached the dock, and Lynn's gaze quickly locked onto a figure in the crowd. Although the figure was low profile and dressed rather plainly, likely with some kind of perception-reducing buff attached, Lynn noticed them at once and recognized who it was, Admiral of Stars, Catalya. End of chapter. Huh. She came in person. And so early too. I thought we'd have to wait a few more days, Lynn said, rubbing his chin. Although Klein's intuition wasn't as sharp as Lynn's, he wasn't oblivious to the situation. His attention was soon drawn to a figure outside the crowd. It was a tall woman with black hair, dressed in a pale yellow gown adorned with eye-like patterns. She wore a veil, and around her waist was an ornament resembling an astrolabe. This gave her a mysterious air without being overly conspicuous, like a noble lady with a penchant for the esoteric, visiting the five seas for a holiday. Klein's gaze lingered on the astrolabe for a few seconds, almost immediately recognizing it as something connected to the item that had established a link between him and little son Derek. An object tinged with the aura of the gray fog. In that moment, the fool had his suspicions confirmed. He knew that if he wished, he could summon her into the gray fog using that astrolabe, just like he had done with Miss Justice, the Hanged Man, and Little Son in the past. At the same time, Klein naturally deduced her identity. The woman was none other than Catalia, the student of Bernadette, the captain of the future. Like Lynn, Klein was somewhat surprised that Admiral of Stars, Catalia, had come personally to fetch them, rather than sending one of her subordinates. But after the initial surprise, Klein recalled something else. First, the future's first mate, Frank Lee, seemed to have some unusual familiarity with him. Second, Catalia possessed an item connected to the gray fog. These two facts together led Klein to form a guess. Just as he was thinking, he heard Lynn whisper beside him, "Yes, you're right. She's also a member of the Tarot Club, and we share the same pathway." At this point, Lynn's tone turned a bit frustrated, as if he was annoyed by this coincidence. The fool gave Lynn a glance and quickly understood why he was upset. The 22 seats of the Tarot Club seemingly corresponded to the 22 sequences. Since both Lynn and Catalia were on the Hermit pathway, it made sense that they would clash in their roles. Though Klein himself didn't particularly mind, it seemed Lynn was a bit vexed by the situation. "Alright, fine. I admit it. I'm the imposter here," Lynn muttered under his breath. "After all, in the original timeline, I wasn't even supposed to exist. Catalia should have been the hermit in the Tarot Club." Lynn's words had a touch of resignation, clearly upset by the fact that he was an accidental addition. He was somewhat irked by the thought of being redundant. He wanted to feel special, not like a side character. After all, sometimes, Lynn's psychological age was really just 3.5, making him a bit childish at times. Sigh, if only my main account had been on the Savon pathway. Lynn silently complained to himself. Seeing Lynn's sudden childish behavior, Klein could only shake his head in exasperation. After thinking for a moment, he lowered his voice and said, "But you're still the Pope of the Fool, right? Catalia wouldn't have chosen the Pope card, would she? Of course not. She's the Hermit, and obviously, the Hermit corresponds to the Hermit pathway," Lynn grumbled, but his mood visibly brightened. That's right, even though they shared the same pathway, Lynn was still the one and only Pope of the Fool in the Tarot Club. Satisfied with this thought, Lynn felt a lot better. Klein, noticing how easily pacified Lynn was, silently sighed at how accustomed he had become to handling this man-child. With Lynn and the accessory named Danitz in tow, they pushed through the crowd and approached Catalia. "Good morning, ma'am. You must be the one that BB sent to receive us." Lynn cheerfully greeted Catalia, clearly in high spirits now that his mood had improved. When facing allies, Lynn always maintained a warm and jovial demeanor. Catalia, having just confirmed their identities through appearance, was momentarily taken aback by Lynn's words. Her smile froze for a second as she subconsciously re-evaluated the youthful man standing a mere few meters away, who looked no older than his early 20s, yet likely had the psychological age of a child. It wasn't entirely her fault. After all, Catalia had always viewed Bernadette as a mother figure. It was hard to imagine someone addressing the mysterious Queen Bernadette with a nickname like BB. No, this wasn't so surprising. After all, Miss Bernadette's letter had mentioned that these two were special senior to her. Catalia took a deep breath, calming her thoughts as she readied herself to respond, only for Lynn to continue, "So, your little cat, right? BB told me about you. She really loves you as her daughter, but she's a bit shy about saying it. I'm just telling you in secret, so don't snitch, okay?" Catalia was stunned. Her first reaction was a mixture of shock and joy. Her long-hidden emotions towards Bernadette had been exposed. She did indeed regard Bernadette as a mother, even though they had never openly acknowledged it. Then came a rush of delight. Miss Bernadette loves me. She also sees me as a daughter. No, Catalia, stay calm. This is just his claim. She may not think that, but. To hell with calm. He said Miss Bernadette loves her as a daughter. With the strings of rationality snapping under the weight of emotions, Catalia looked at Lynn and bit her lip before finally giving in to the urge to ask, what did she told about me, is she doing well? If anyone else had said this, Catalia, the Admiral of Stars, would never have believed them so easily, let alone allow her emotions to override her logic. But this was Lynn, the same Lynn who could sway even the Lord of Storms with just a few words. Moreover, Lynn was Bernadette's designated senior, and this added a filter that naturally made Catalia more inclined to believe him. She's doing fine. She recently reunited with her long-lost father and even gave him a well-deserved beating, which helped her resolve some long-standing issues. She's currently preparing for her advancement to Sage. Lynn explained nonchalantly, knowing Catalia's loyalty to Bernadette would never waver. As for what she said about you, Lynn added, she proudly told her father that she has a very capable daughter. Lynn was simply telling the truth. When Bernadette spoke about Catalia to Russell, her tone had been filled with pride and admiration, though perhaps not in such straightforward words. Still, the meaning was clear. Catalia's ears flushed red as the news sank in. She was visibly overwhelmed by the revelation. A few moments later, she snapped back to reality, eyes wide in disbelief. Miss Bernadette's father. Isn't that Emperor Russell? She had finally found her father. End of chapter.